Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. May peace and safety be upon you, and may Allah's mercy be with you. For those of you, Allah is God, so it's God for everybody. On behalf of the London Institute of South Asia, I take this opportunity to warmly welcome you this evening at our annual seminar on roots and realities of terrorism in the subcontinent. Those of you who are not familiar with the London Institute of South Asia, I will very briefly state that we are an absolutely independent organization. We are a non-profit organization, and we are not funded by anybody other than our own directors. So we are an open book, and we live in a very minimal budget. LISA, the abbreviation for London Institute of South Asia, was a dream that started about 6 years ago. The person who envisioned this dream is fortunately amongst us today. And it's my proud privilege to present Brigadier Usman Khalid, who is sitting right of the Mr. Chairman. LISA, under his guidance, an enlightened vision, has come of age. We would also like to extend our gratitude and thanks to all the role players and have made it possible for this dream to be turned into a reality. I would, since we are quite late in starting by about 15 to 20 minutes, I would very briefly take a few moments to introduce our chairman of the seminar, Mr. Alan Hart. He's a role model of note and a man of distinction. He has been engaged with the events in the Middle East and their global consequences and terrifying implications. The possibility, as he puts it, a clash of civilizations. Alan is a fiercely independent thinker. He hates all labels and isms and has never been a member of any political party or any group. He prefers to judge issues on their own merit. As a researcher and author, his first famous book was Arafat, Terrorist or Peacemaker, published in 1984, and subsequently in several updated editions went on for well over a decade. In his zest for the search of peace, his efforts have been extensively and highly laudable. He has actively involved in the covert diplomacy, or call it backdoor diplomacy, or some call it track-through diplomacy, to bring about a resolution of the Palestinian problem. I would put it this way, he has practically put a lifetime effort into it. His mediation was based on truth-telling, which he believes that peacemaking is not possible without doing so. A decade later, a process that he had originally initiated became to be well known to you. It's called the Oslo process, which is still being mentioned and being talked about from time to time. His latest book on Zionism, The Real Enemy of Jews. The book's name is Zionism, The Real Enemy of Jews, shows that countdown to Armageddon is on and how it can possibly be stopped. And I would recommend everyone who's concerned about the Middle East to at least read that book, because that tells the real realities. With this quick introduction of the chairman, and before I hand over the seminar's proceedings to you, sir, let me briefly tell you the form this particular seminar is going to take place. Basically, it's a very informal seminar. It's more of an in-house seminar. And each speaker here today has come from different parts of the world, and each speaker will be introduced to you as he comes up, stands here, then the chairman will let you know who he is and then he'll tell you what he wants to talk about. We have allocated limited time because I know we started a bit late today, so I would request them to please not exceed 15 minutes. And also that those of you who will be interested, their written work or written research on this particular subject will be available on our website, which is lisauk.com, and will also be available in our quarterly journal, which LISA publishes, and the specimens of you, including the latest ones, are on that table where the water lies. And you are most welcome to take when you leave as many copies as you think that you would like to take. After each speaker has spoken what he wants to, we will have the audience ask him questions straight away, and I would request you not to ask more than 2 questions per speaker, because we would be having at least 20 minutes towards the end where you can put the questions to the entire House the way you deem fit, or we shall welcome your participation or comments on the subject as well. And after that, we shall, before we go for the refreshments, it will be just basically a cup of tea and a few snacks. We have a small little ceremony which is to take place today. That is the Lisa Annual Book Award. This is the kind of award that we give for the person who has written a book which attributes towards peace in the subcontinent or the peace in South Asia, which also highlights the realities of what subcontinent is all about. And this year, we will announce later who it goes to towards the end of the seminar. And after that, we will go in for the tea break, and so that we can talk to each other of what has transpired today. So without much ado, I hand you over to Mr. Alan Hart.
Okay. I'm very happy. Thank you, Saeed, for your very kind remarks. I'm very happy to be with my Lisa friends again, and I looked upon the invitation to chair this seminar as an honour. Not a great honour, but an honour nevertheless. Now, as Saeed has told you, my main area of real expertise is the Middle East. Now, I describe the conflict in and over Palestine that became Israel as the cancer at the heart of international affairs, and which on present course may well consume us all. What do I mean by consume us all? The shortest answer to that question is in a statement made to me by Prime Minister Golda Meir in an interview I did with her for the BBC's Panorama programme. She said that in a doomsday situation, Israel, quote, would be prepared to take the region and the world down with it, unquote. Now, less than an hour after that interview was transmitted on a Monday evening, the Times of London, then a very good newspaper, changed its lead editorial to quote what Golda had said to me. It then added its own opinion. We had better believe her. I did, and I still do. Now, on the subject of the roots and realities of terrorism in the subcontinent, the distinguished speakers who will be addressing you are far greater experts than me. So my purpose in taking a few minutes of your time now is to offer you just a few general thoughts about terrorism to give what they're going to say perhaps a little bit of context. The problem for any discussion about terrorism is there is no agreement on what it is, and therefore no agreement when the use of violence to press a claim for justice is, or even may be, legitimate. In my opinion, the main reason why there is no agreement can be simply stated. Governments do not want to admit that there are 2 kinds of terrorism. There is state terrorism and non-state terrorism. Now, state terrorism can be defined, I say, as the use of force by governments to impose their will on others, even when the others are the victims of injustice and have right on their side. I imagine there are few, if any, in this room, and even those who will be watching on the net and elsewhere, who would challenge the statement that in recent decades, the 2 leading practitioners of state terrorism were, as they still are, governments of America and the Zionist State of Israel. Now, to me, the most fascinating thing about state terrorism is that it's almost always counterproductive. As evidence for that, we have only to consider how the war against terrorism policies President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Blair became the best recruiting sergeants for violent Islamic fundamentalism. In verbal parenthesis, I'll add that because of his escalation of killing by drones, there's a case for saying that President Obama is every bit as much a state terrorist leader as Bush and Blair were. Now, on the subject of the counterproductive nature of American foreign policy, a most informed and explicit statement was made a day or two ago by Dennis Kucinich, one of Ohio's representatives in Congress. He's also one of the few in that den of corrupted democracy who tell it like it is. He said, quote, and just listen to this. This is an American speaking. After more than 10 years of war against Al-Qaeda and the accompanying global war on terrorism, we have failed to learn that our actions create reactions. Our presence creates destabilization and radicalization. Occupations create insurgencies. In Afghanistan, we have fueled the very insurgency we struggle to fight. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Al-Qaeda surfs instability created or supported by US interventions. Al-Qaeda is ready to exploit resentment towards the US while capitalizing on the openings created by US interventionism. As a result, our US tax dollars are being used to fuel the rise of extremism. And that, I believe, is the background to so much terrorism that's going on today. Now, it is not so with non-state terrorism. It can be effective, provided its practitioners are ruthless enough and can sustain what they're doing. Two examples are sufficient to make the point. Zionist terrorism drove out first the occupying British from Palestine, and then about 3/4 of its indigenous Arab people. Without Zionist terrorism, and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine it made possible, there would be no Israel. Now, that said, I must tell you one of my favourite stories. It does have a point. In 1980, I was acting as the link man in a secret exploratory dialogue between Yasser Arafat and Peres. And one of the two men advising Peres was Major General Shlomo Gazit, the best and the brightest of Israel's directors of military intelligence. When we were alone together one morning, over coffee, he made this statement to me. He said, if we had been the Palestinians, we'd have had our mini-state a long time ago. He meant that if the Jews had been the Palestinians, they would have subjected Israel to a sustained and devastating terror campaign, which would have obliged its government to end the occupation of land grabbed in 1967 to make the space for a Palestinian state. Now, Gazit was in fact acknowledging a truth about why non-state terrorism can get results, provided it is ruthless enough and sustained. Simply stated, that truth is this. In democracies, there are limits to the amount of disruption, destruction and death the soft underbelly of public opinion will tolerate. I mean that if terrorism is ruthless enough and sustained, there comes a point when public opinion says to government, we can't take any more of this mayhem. Do whatever is necessary to stop it. Make whatever deal is necessary. Now, the Provisional IRA in Northern Ireland was a non-state terrorist organisation that understood that totally. And that's my second example. It was the Provisional IRA's ruthless and sustained campaign of terror, particularly here on the British mainland, that caused Westminster governments to confront Protestant Zionist-like supremacy in Northern Ireland by insisting on a power-sharing arrangement to give the Catholic minority a fair deal and open the door to peace. Now, there were in fact two reasons why successive governments moved progressively but decisively in favour of risking the wrath of Northern Ireland's militant Protestant majority by engaging politically and positively with IRA's terrorist leaders. One reason, evident from conversations with government ministers and shadow ministers at the time, was an awareness that because of the failure by the military to defeat the Provisional IRA and bring its terrorism to an end by military means, the limits to the amount of disruption, destruction and death the soft underbelly of British public opinion was prepared to tolerate were being reached. In England, for example, there was growing support for the idea that Britain should let Northern Ireland go, pull its troops out and tell the Protestants and the Catholics to go to hell. The other reason was fear in government and other establishment circles of the economic damage that could have been done to the UK if the Provisional IRA continued and escalated its terror campaign. My own understanding of this particular aspect of the matter was assisted by a former director of British military intelligence who said to me, quote, "There was real fear that the Provisional IRA could blow the heart out of financial London and bring our economy to its knees." There really is no mystery about how non-state terrorism can be defeated. In my book, Zionism, the Real Enemy of the Jews, I give a summary explanation in 147 words, which, as I noted, are clear enough for understanding, I think, by an averagely intelligent child. I think I did read the 147 words to a Lisa audience a year or two ago, but they bear repeating, and here are those 147 words. And they're very important. Terrorists cannot operate, not for long, without the cover and the practical, emotional and moral support of the community of which they are a part. When that community perceives itself to be the victim of a massive injustice, the community will cover, condone, and even applaud the activities of those of its own who resort to terror as the only means of drawing attention to injustice to cause it to be addressed. It follows, my friends, that the way to defeat terrorism, the only successful and actually proven way, is by addressing the genuine, legitimate grievances of the host community. The community will then withdraw its cover and support for the terrorists. And if they try to continue to operate, the community will expose them by reporting them to the authorities if reasoning fails. And that's precisely what happened in Northern Ireland. The terrorists called off their campaign when they had no choice, because the Catholic host community would not cover and support them any longer. And that happened, as I've indicated, because the British government summoned up the will, about half a century later than it should have done, to risk the wrath of militant Protestantism by insisting that the legitimate grievances of the Catholics of Northern Ireland be addressed. Now, I was going to close by making a comment about the inevitability of state terrorism, state terrorism and non-state terrorism, but we can leave that until later. The only thing I would say is that there are two ways to run this world of ours. One is according to jungle law, and the other is according to international law, which respects the rights and political rights and the human rights of all citizens. I say we've had enough of jungle law, and it's time for international law to be applied all over the world. That's what I dream of. Thank you for that. Right, now, thank you. Now we're going to have some speakers. And the first one who's going to speak to us is Dr. Shahid Qureshi. Some of you will know him. He lives in London. He's a writer and a journalist on foreign policy. And he's a political analyst, and he contributes to the BBC, Al Jazeera, Press TV, GOTV, and LBC's Radio London. He's a director of the London Post, and he is invited to think tanks to discuss international affairs in many places. So, dear Shahid, would you come and talk to us, please?
Mr. Chairman, Brigadier Usman Khalid, Brigadier Ismat Saeed, thank you very much for inviting me to your institute. It's been a very long time since I don't have an earphone in my ear from the producer and doing a TV program. It's the real honor to be here. The topic was very interesting, which I'm working on since the start of the war on terror. I will keep it informal. I won't kind of bombard you with the information and get you bored with it. I have kept it practicalize it. I'm not going to rationalize the war on terror. I'm going to put some questions in your mind that you will think about it, that what is it the war on terror about? In November of 2009, one of the experts of RUSI said to me, Dr. Qureshi, soon you will not hear the word war on terror. And it's August 2012. We don't hear this word anymore, war on terror. Which means when it started, there was a timeline with it. When it ended with its timeline. Now, who benefited from the war on terror and who lost out? That is something which needs to be understood and considered. Where is war on terror is going on in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and rest of the world informally. In terms of, if I go on what's happening in Pakistan, who's the main victim of this war on terror, they have lost about 40,000 civilians, about 4,000 soldiers, $70 billion economic and financial losses as a result of this war, which the elite, the leadership of Pakistan, they imposed on themselves without even doing a proper consideration. Without going into the history, but it's very important to understand that who are the real beneficiaries of this war? Who bought the villas and the big mansions around the beaches of the United States and Caribbeans? Maybe some state agents will be able to give you this information. The paranoia this war has created is so much so that when you go to airport, they will ask you to leave your water bottle or buy another one when you go in. They'll ask you to leave your shaving kit, buy another one. So people are getting rich. Some few things which are not scientifically possible to do it, but because of the paranoia they have created, some water companies are getting rich, some perfume making or deodorant making companies are getting rich because they're asking people to waste all these things at all the airports in the UK and elsewhere. The amount of bombing and the money that has been lost on Afghanistan and Pakistan and elsewhere, the price tag attached to it. For example, in Afghanistan, the United States is spending about $7 billion a year. If only 10% of that ammunition which was used on Afghans was spent on them, then US won't need that war. There will be friends of United States everywhere. They won't need a base or they won't need those heavy mechanized vehicles against the IEDs because they will have a lot of friends in Afghanistan. But was that the objective to start this war? To make friends in Afghanistan? Or was it to run the big military complex in the United States and elsewhere? The mindset behind this war was to rationalize the war. When I use the word rationalize, which means to justify to the US public and the Western publics that they're gone into this war because if they don't, then the Afghani from Kabul is going to come and invade the United States. And as any sane person will think that the Afghanis or Pakistanis, they do not have any plan to invade Afghanistan or invade the United States. They will want to go through the legitimate means. But this paranoia has created so much resentment among the people. And it sounds like that this is happening by design, that you don't want friends, you want enemies. Because surely if you want friends, your objectives, your line of action would be different, isn't it? Now, when you when I talked about the war profiteering and people who are profiting from this war, or benefiting from this war, they are all the same everywhere in the world, be in the UK, in Pakistan, and they are a very small minority. And when I talked about, recently I wrote about them, and the amount of pressure I had as a journalist, I never had that pressure for the last 20 years. And that pressure was kind of starting from threats to a lot of, and I realized that have I touched some weak or some nerve which is really, really affected? For example, and that how that triggered. I was watching Ross Kemp. Those of you who watched EastEnders, they might know him. Ross Kemp was doing a documentary on gangs, and he went to El Salvador, and he was doing this gang MS-13, and he was interviewing all these gang members with tattoos and the prisons and all that. And then he went to this journalist, Lino Gomez, and he asked him, he said, what's going on in El Salvador? And Lino Gomez said, do you know, in El Salvador, they are around 570 tons of cocaine going past El Salvador every year, according to the US Drug Enforcement Agency, which is worth about $30 billion. And recently there was a report in a newspaper where saying that from Afghanistan, the opium or the drugs which was produced in Afghanistan was worth about $8 billion. And Taliban's are getting about over $300 billion a year from that drug trade. And he said that the real terrorists or the real gangsters are not these guys on the streets. The real gangsters are sitting in big villas with Rolex watches, with pinstripe suits. They are not the terrorists, they are not the gangsters. And that kind of made me to reflect on what's going on in Pakistan, what was happening in Sri Lanka, what was happening in other parts of the world. When I looked at it from the South Asian Pakistani perspective, Karachi is the main hub, economic hub of Pakistan. And I've read the interviews of a lot of intelligence reports, joint intelligence reports, which are available on YouTube. And when you listen to these target killers, some of them were mechanics or shopkeepers, and you ask them why you started, and they said, well, I got involved with this gang, and then he asked me to do this, and then I started killing people. So it doesn't make sense to me. I thought, well, you're killing somebody, you don't know why you're killing. The person who's getting killed, he doesn't know why he's getting killed. So whose purpose are you serving? The major party, there are the target killers from all parties. The major party was MQMA, whose leader is based here in London. He himself is a prisoner, probably. He can't move around, and he's got his own issues. And the amount of damage they have caused to the Pakistan Army and the security forces is far higher what the Indians have caused in 1965 war. The total number of soldiers killed in 1965 war was, correct me if I'm wrong, was about 720.
As much as that?
Yes. And the total number of security personnel which is killed by MQM alone is more than 800. And the economic losses, which the two wars, the 1965 and 71 war, that doesn't cause that much economic losses to Pakistan, as much as the MQM strikes and mismanagement and terrorist activities and law and order and peace in Karachi has caused. So India doesn't need to have a nuclear weapon or missiles or F-16s or a MiG-31 or actually, they need an MQM type ANP or these kind of parties to do the job. They don't need any kind of, they can have their military strategy, but this, whatever they're doing, keep Karachi bleeding, means the Pakistan is bleeding. And sooner the military establishment, the establishment of Pakistan, the civilians, the amount of people getting killed in this war, the people who are getting killed, they don't know why they're getting killed. And people who are killing them, they don't know why they're killing these people. So that is kind of a background which is happening. I mean, those parties have become like a hired gun, according to some reports which was published widely in the press. Then these organizations, these terrorist organizations, offered their services to the bidder, saying that we will be doing any services for you, starting from spying to bombing to all kind of services are available if you give us this amount of money. And now these terrorist organizations have become self-funded, which means the US or any foreign powers, they don't need to give them. They go and take money from a big businessman, buy weapon, and then they kill the same businessman. So they don't need any foreign aid or foreign assistance. They have become quite self-sufficient. I was talking about the drug trade element involved into the war on terror and how this funded into the whole thing. When in 2001, the drug production in Afghanistan was 0, and that is according to the Drug Scope report. After the US invasion and takeover, the drug production increased, guess how much? 1,400%. That's how much increased after the US invasion to Afghanistan. Instead of it's becoming 0 or minimal, it's increased. So there are a lot of parties involved into it, which a journalist like me or a general like Kiani or a judge like Iftikhar Chaudhry can't afford to handle or tackle. They're too weak, too small for that. I was talking about these people who are benefiting from these war on terror and military complexes. I thought about this. I have this Queen Bee model of financial terrorism. Now, this Queen Bee model of financial terrorism is when you have one person who is very well known, a very high figure in the society, a well respected businessman, and all the criminals, they go with their money and say, this is our money, can you please invest somewhere? And this Queen Bee sit on the top with and then he kind of come up with this figure saying that, and everybody will give you a very good references and say, this person can't do that. But in actual fact, these are the people who are financially providing support for the terrorist activities. Terrorists can't function without any financial assistance from within, as Alan Hart said in the Northern Ireland cases, when the public support withdrew from the terrorists, they couldn't function. So that those small minorities, especially in Karachi, which Karachi is more than how many, 140, how many millions are in 14 or 18 million people?
20 million.
20 million. And out of those 20 million, we will see the chairman of the organization, all these people are coming from one business community, which has got direct link with or migrated from India. Now, I don't see India as somebody who will be happy to have a destabilized Pakistan, because if India is really interested to have a stabilized India, they have to have a stabilized Pakistan. If Pakistan destabilized, it's a train which won't stop. The train will move on, because the Indians have already 14 separatist or militant movements going on inside India, which people don't talk about it, because the media is controlled by the Friends of India or the United States or anybody who is linked with that region. Media is something which is playing vital role. I mean, and the language, the articulation of the argument. I was on a DLR tube and I was reading this saying, if the passenger service agent asks you to vacate this seat, please leave. Which means passenger service agent was meant to be the driver of the... So they coined these kind of terms. They could say the driver. If the driver comes, then it won't be a DLR, is it? There won't be a computerized train, would it? So it's very, very important that the people who are on the right side of the argument knows how this media is indoctrinating these ideas with them. Okay, I've got 2 minutes. Now, I have mentioned that how Pakistan's economy is affected by it, but I would call that Pakistan is put on a diet plan. And when I say diet plan, which means that keep Pakistan bleeding, not letting it die, or not letting it flourish. Because the people who benefited from it are not in a vast majority. And the root causes of Pakistan's and the United States dilemma is there's an element of mistrust. Pakistan doesn't consider the United States as an enemy, but the United States considered Pakistan as enemy. Because it's in the US establishment, some people think that they need enemies, but they don't need proper enemies. They need some kind of small enemies which they can handle with it. They can deal with it. Like Afghanistan, they don't have air force, they don't have an army, so they can go and have a good time there, kill people, come back. But they won't go to North Korea, or they won't go anywhere else where they can have a proper resistance. So it is up to the establishment in Pakistan that how they want to have a relationship with the United States. Well, they want to have a relationship like a state, or they want to have a relationship like a dummy, an extension of the US policy, where they're getting their own people killed, which is about 40,000. They got their economic losses, which is about 70 billion. Or they really, really want to have a proper dialogue with the United States to review the US policy on war on terror and wrap it up as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
B.T. Rashekar is known to very many people. He's the champion of the Dalits, though he's not himself a Dalit, but he's from the lower classes, I believe. He is the founder and editor of Dalit Voice, which has been described by Human Rights Watch as India's most widely circulated Dalit journal.
That's enough.
That's enough. Okay. Do you mind me saying that's enough to you when you're about 12 minutes in?
My name is V.T. Rashekar. I have come all the way from India. I stand before you as a representative of the victims of one of the world's biggest state terrorism called Brahmanism, hiding under the name of Hinduism. The two victims of Brahmanism are sitting right here. Brother Avatar Singh II is not allowed to come to India. He stays in Canada. Independent India is 65 years old and yet remains chaotic, poverty-stricken, and fast sinking, described as the only permanently sick man of the world, at war with itself, its own people, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, tribals, backward castes, totaling over 85% of its permanent slaves. India's less than 50% of the ruling upper caste are busy fighting their own people on one side, and all its neighbors, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Lanka, China, Burma. It is fighting against its people on inside and fighting all the neighbors. Have you heard of a country like this anywhere in the world? The world's only Hindu country, Nepal. India is not a Hindu country, but Nepal is the only Hindu country. India has quarreled with that also. Nepal hates Hindu India. How do you like this scene? India has become the 8th wonder of the world. In this paper, I am trying to trace the roots and realities of state terrorism spread all over the country, all over South Asia also. Philosophers, historians, and thinking people have attributed this unheard of disease to India's reigning religion of Brahmanism, which is hiding under the name of Hinduism. Hinduism like a black cat, closing the eyes, somebody is searching where is the cat. This is like that Hindu. Hinduism does not come under the definition of religion. Religion has a definition. I don't want to go into that question here. Hinduism is not a religion, it's a way of life. Brahmanism, which is the real name of this so-called religion, is the product of a horrible brand of racism, disguising as religion. Have you ever heard of such a situation anywhere in the world? I visited almost every important country in the world and discussed with many scholars. They are all wondering what is happening to this country. Ever since the great glorious Buddhism was defeated by the invading Aryans, India has been suffering from a brand of racism unheard of in world history, thereby becoming a permanently sick country, the one and the only one of its kind in the whole world. Permanently sick. The oft-heard loud slogans like India shining, India jumping, India roaring, all bullshit. The ruling class bid to fool those who are willing to be fooled and hide the sting. Every part of the world is developing, marching forward, but India is getting stunted even as it's less than 15% of the upper caste who constitute the engine of Brahmanism is gagging its millions of people. Dalits 20% of the population, tribals 10%, backward caste 35%, a total of 65%, plus Muslims 15%, Christians 2.5%, Sikhs 2.5%, another 20%. All the 6 sections of the population, totally over 85% of the population, are facing slow death. If you want to see such a gigantic country, the world's second largest, with over 1,600 million starving, permanently sick, directionless people, please come to India. There is no place in the Bombay footpath to sleep. This was even when I was the Indian Express in 1960, 61. There was no place in any footpath in Bombay city. All packed. They'd be sleeping. The 8th wonder of the world. India is the 8th wonder of the world. You are wondering how this tiny, less than 15% of the grass-eating upper caste manage this non-violent enslavement of the over 85% of the Bahujan Samaj, as Dr. Ambedkar called. This is the wonder of all wonders, the 8th wonder of the world. Just because the Shah Rukh Khan and all these stupid people come here, don't mistake them to India. They are the refuse of the country. The answer is simple. Managing, this is the trick the Brahmins are using, managing the different social contradictions by setting up one caste or religion against the other. They are doing it in Punjab very beautifully. Over the whole, condemned to be the permanently sick nation of the world. And yet, all these are very carefully hidden because, as Sardar Gurtej Singh said, the media to which I belongs owned by the Baniyas and managed by the Brahmins, the two most dangerous communities. They are packed in London. Yesterday, sir, I went to get my speech photocopied. He photocopied, kept one copy for himself. One copy he kept for himself. So, I was dismissed from the Indian Express. So many things happened, put in the jail. I was in Chandigarh jail. Many times I wonder how I am alive today. Look at our neighboring China, which became independent 2-3 years after India. Today it is on the top of the world. Already number 2, but poised to become the number 1 within 2-3 years. How it has become? We are left out. Did not Mao Zedong say, when China wakes up, it will shake the world? Yes, it is shaking. Brahmins, beware. I have gone to China twice as the leader of the delegation. I have briefed them fully. Every country around the world has galloped, but India is sinking and has come to be known as the permanently sick man of the world. Why India failed? The sole cause is the Brahminical caste system. Ascending order of reverence with the descending degree of contempt, which is fully protected by the country's very constitution of India is protecting it. There is not a single voice against this tyrannical human pyramid called the caste system, which is killing India. So much so, India has become the laughing stock of the world. All the brilliant people in the World Bank, people, all of them, they know about it. My son is the head of the Amnesty International of the whole world. Amnesty International is not allowed to open an office in Delhi. They say, we have no human rights problem at all in India. What they mean is there are no human beings at all in India. See what they have done see what the Indian ruling class has done just at the just concluded London Olympics. Shameless. Boasting and bragging about their cricket. I don't know who discovered this cricket. They said British people were playing cricket. What does Alan Hart? British people were, when I ask the British people, they say our game is football. This cricket ideally suits this, what is this, idli sambar eating people. Nobody plays cricket in the world. And India has taken this so far. As long as this Brahminical upper caste, who constitute less than 15%, continue as our rulers, India will continue to be in a permanent state of hellhole, neither living nor dead. How did this tiny 15% upper caste manage to remain as the rulers of India? That's the wonder. From century, even when the Muslims were ruling India for about 800 to 1000 years, they supplied all their girls. Akbar had a Brahmin wife. Rajput. This is the eighth wonder of the world. This is the top secret. Keep the vast oppressed over 85% of the population dust poor. Keep them dust poor, fully doped under a poison pill called Brahminism, parading as Hinduism, reduced to unthinking morons. Only angry people can bring about a revolution. We are all angry people. 6. We were driven out of India. Unthinking people will not get angry at all, how then can they think of a revolution? This dope of Hinduism keeps them unthinking, addicted to superstitions, injected into the blood by over 330 million gods we are having. And they have their countless wives and their concubines. For every street we have a god, every street we have a temple, every street. All entire money of the people goes into the temples, and the Brahmins have developed potbellies. This, in short, is the heartbreaking story of Hindu India, whose Brahminical rulers have forced every one of its neighbors into deadly enemies. So much so, India has descended from the third world and sinking into the fourth world. And yet, extremely arrogant. Hundreds of them are there in London. Extremely arrogant. You can't talk to a Hindu. And yet, permanently copycats, with not a single original thing to their credit. Not a single. All its biggest critics, India's all big cities are dying. Calcutta died 20 years ago. Bombay has become one vast slum. Delhi is collapsing. Madras stinking. While on one side, the Brahminical rulers have waged war against every country around India, it has become the closest ally of its blood brothers, the Jews of Israel. Closest. The Jews at least have produced many revolutionaries. We have to admit that. Thinkers, scholars, scientists. But the Jews of India, as I have called them, have produced only worms. The latest proof is the London Olympics. There also they managed to put one girl on the front. What a thing. All the newspapers in India produced the picture, and they became very proud that our girl is there leading it. So much so, under this Hindu India, we, the over 85% of the slaves, are suffocated to death, neither living nor dead. This, in brief, is a sad, heartrending story of the 1,600 million slaves of India. And the slaves have been enjoying the slavery from thousands of years. The only way to liberate them is to make the slaves think. Tell the slave he is a slave, he will revolt. And this is possible only if we set up our own media center in Delhi. Dalit Voice has been the country's only flag carrier of the slaves of India. But you will be shocked to hear that the Brahminical enemy has succeeded in gagging even the Dalit Voice, the 35-year-old paper. For the last 6 months, Dalit Voice is not coming out. See how the Jews have set up Al Jazeera to fool the Muslims. Well, Al Jazeera is not Muslims. Muslims think it is a Muslim. It is not. Brahmins have got, the Jews have got one TV. Brahmins have got many. Jews are, there are so many good Jews, but there have not been a beautiful, there's no time here. There was a great conversation between Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy, one great man, and Gandhi, the Gujarati Banya. So Periyar asked, why are you always criticizing the Brahmin? Is there no good Brahmin? Then Gandhi started thinking what to do, how to say. Gandhi was not a Brahmin. And finally he said, what about Gopal Krishna Gokhale? Then Periyar said, such a great man like you, Mahatma, it took 2 minutes. If the Bahujan representative sitting here mind, it is possible to revive Dalit Voice. The investment is not much. We have the willing team, but not the money. One warning to the Muslims of Pakistan and also India. Please don't fall prey to the Aman Ki Asha stunt. This is a stunt launched from India to fool the Muslims. Muslims are innocent people. For you, 2 plus 2 becomes 4. For a Brahmin, 2 plus 2 becomes 20, 30, like this. Aman Ki Asha, they have joined hands with some of the scoundrels in Pakistan. Beware of this. Finally, very big developments are taking place outside India. Very big developments are taking place. I'm in touch with them. They are in touch with me. I will not be able to tell it because if I tell it, it may go out. Very big developments are taking place outside India, and these developments will be helpful to us. I will not be able to elaborate this in an open meeting like this. But to welcome these outside developments and enlighten the internal oppressed Indians, we need such a media. Professor Gurtej Singh has already said how the media is manipulating the mind of the people. We will not be able to go to the level of Dawn or the Times of India or like that. I went through today's 2-3 English daily papers. Not one word is there about India. There is nothing to write about India. But about Pakistan is there, about other things are there. We have to have it. Yes, finished. So, if you don't set up a media of our own, India will be pushed from the third world to the fourth world. With this warning, I conclude. If there are any questions, it can be tackled later.
Yes, we can.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I'm conscious that I don't want to get chit that 15 minutes are over. I start with the prayer of Prophet Moses as quoted in the Holy Book. Rabbi sharah li sadri wa jassir li amri wahlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. O Allah, O God, open my breast upon me, remove the impediment of my speech, make my task easier so that you people understand. Ameen. First of all, I must thank Mr. Chairman, who read out about 80% of my paper and made my job much easier. When coming to the introduction in my paper, I leave out certain details because basic thing to be discussed today is terrorism, and whether it takes the shape of extremism in manifestation, whether it takes the shape of insurgency, it remains terrorism. But we have come to certain conclusions, and one of them is that people resort to terrorism when justice is not imparted to them, when they are not treated fairly. And this is this disparity in behavior which creates resentment and which creates reaction. In the earlier stages, that reaction may be by word of mouth, but when you don't let people even speak, then they resort to clandestine operations like terrorism and the like. As Mr. Chairman explained, in the 1930 and 1937 Convention of not the United Nations at that time, it was the League of Nations. It was a mention about terrorism by saying punishment and penalty for terrorism, and by implication it stated when terrorism is committed against the unarmed civilians, proper action will be taken, and the actions were enumerated. it means that this terrorism was confined only to the unarmed, non-combatant civilians. And if you do anything other than that, that is not terrorism. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive statement. And therefore, in the year 2004, a proper discussion took place at the United Nations, but no conclusion could be arrived at. The reason is very obvious, because the proposed amendments or the definitions did not suit the purpose of the Jews, Americans, and other big powers. Because if they acknowledge that they are committing state terrorism against the unarmed people, then they won't be able to carry on. So therefore, this remains inconclusive, and a very good definition tabled by Kazakhstan was also turned down. Since today we have to discuss the roots of terrorism in the subcontinent, I'll confine myself to this subject alone. As I said a little while earlier, inequality and injustice is the root cause of all terrorism today. The Palestinians, there's no need for them to kill and get killed if they get justice. Kashmiris, Dalits, in India, the low-caste classes, if they get justice, they will not resort to terrorism as perceived by their rulers, because they think they are fighting their battle of independence. They're struggling for independence against the stranglehold of the Brahman. There is an appropriate Urdu couplet by a famous revolutionary poet, Habib Jalib, which reads, "Zulm rahe aur amn bhi ho, kya mumkin hai tum hi kaho." When translated, it means that you can't even think of having peace when there's pervasive brutality and injustice. So I think he's very rightly said it and given you exactly the root cause of terrorism. As regards India, because we're talking of the subcontinent and India is a major chunk of the subcontinent, Sardarji has amply explained the reasons for the Brahmanism, the Hindu religious system, which has subjugated every other non-Hindu, non-Brahman in fact, into a stranglehold, and they have enslaved them mentally so much that even when they try to struggle out of this caste system, it is not acceptable. To quote an example in the lighter vein, all of us know that an Indian Dalit who's burnt by caste, she was Aishwarya Rai, I'm referring to Aishwarya Rai, she was Miss Universe. And this was not palatable for the Brahmins. So they first tried to jeopardize her marriage with a Muslim because she wanted to get out of this caste system by marrying a Muslim. So they made cases against Salman Khan, and as a result, they broke apart. And now they have upgraded Aishwarya Rai in the Brahman class. She no longer owns her Dalit class as being called a Shudra or a low-class citizen. She also thinks that she is amongst the higher-class Hindus. So it means you can only live in India if you belong to that upper class of Brahmins, and there's no survival for anybody else. Now, 9/11 incident unfortunately came as a boon for India, because India was successful in making the people believe that all freedom movements going on within India, which exceed 1 dozen at the moment, they are all nothing but acts of terrorism. And the United States readily cooperated with India by accepting her viewpoint that all these movements are separatist movements and they are secessionists and they are resorting to terrorism, Therefore, India has the right to crush them. Now, USA, the so-called flag bearer of liberty, freedom, and human rights, very conveniently sacrificed its principles at the altar of its regional and global interests. We don't have to quote examples here, but I think one or two may be appropriate. As stated by Sardarji, no non-Hindu is safe in India. This Frankenstein of Hindutva released by the Brahman, it's a Frankenstein which is eating away the creator itself. And this Hindutva is going to be the beginning of the end of India. You must have read a couple of years ago that even Christian nuns were tied to the tree trunks and burnt alive. So which minority in India is living an honorable life? And their only guilt was that they were preaching Christianity. Now, we come to the state terrorism, because it's been amply clarified by the President. As per the existing definition of the whatever little form we have in written form, according to that, following things that I'm going to read are not accounted for. State terrorism committed by the governments to keep the subjugated people in the yokes of slavery against their will. No, this is not state terrorism. It's nowhere mentioned. Invasion of foreign lands and depriving them, the weaker nations, of their freedom it is not an act of terrorism. Acts committed by the occupant forces against those who struggle to drive them out of their soil to regain freedom, this is not terrorism. But those who resist, they are terrorists. Sanctions, bans, threats, and other coercive means employed by the stronger nations to force their will and policies upon the smaller nations is not an act of terrorism as per the existing definitions. And state-backed subversion, terrorism, and funding of terrorist organizations in another country, that is not terrorism. And practically challenging the sovereignty of the weaker nations by resorting to direct drone attacks against their population, regardless of the number of casualties of non-combatants and children, is not an act of terrorism. Well, sir, this is how the definition of terrorism goes today. No, this state terrorism, the chairman briefly touched upon it. It can take many shapes, but we'll only refer to three. One is the coercive terror diplomacy, where you use a fear in the mind of a country or its people of the consequences of denial to concede to the demands of big power. This is also the worst sort of state terrorism. General perception among the people in Pakistan is that in the wake of stopping of NATO supplies, America resorted to coercive diplomacy against Pakistan. There were a number of attacks against Pakistan military installations, which are believed to have been US sponsored to bring Pakistan under pressure. For such attacks, Indian agents, some mercenary Afghans, secessionist elements, and extremists from within Pakistan have been employed. Publicly committed murders by the US agent Raymond Davis in Lahore and clandestine operations of notorious Blackwater are on record. Lately, when the tribal court in Pakistan awarded 33 years imprisonment to Dr. Shakil Afridi, on charges of treason, the US government protested and soon after responded by cutting Pakistan's financial aid exactly corresponding to $33 million. The message was very loud, very clear. The weak Pakistani government, succumbing to US coercion and intimidation, even decided to grant most favored nation status to India and agreed to provide a trade route to Afghanistan and Central Asian republics. Thus, America managed to achieve its objectives through coercive terror policy. This is rule of the jungle, and might is right even in the so-called civilized world of this modern era. Next is the proxy terrorism. When a stronger nation does not get involved in the terrorism directly, but uses a third party to commit terrorism on its behest. Ever since the arrival of NATO forces in Afghanistan, Indian-sponsored acts of terrorism in Pakistan have increased considerably. More than a dozen Indian consulates are now operating along the FPOC border belt. Independent and authoritative sources they have confirmed that these consulates are hosting the Ferraris, or fugitives from Pakistan, using them for clandestine operations inside Pakistan. They are also training and launching secessionist elements for terrorist activities inside Balochistan. There are indications that the US is colluding with India. This fact is substantiated by a resolution tabled in the US Senate to declare Balochistan as an independent state. All this was happening at a time when Pakistan was under immense pressure to reopen the NATO supply routes. So you see, I've given you examples of the coercive US terror policy. We've seen partly India, seen partly Pakistan. As I said, the major beneficiary of the 9/11 events was India, because in the garb of anti-terrorist activities, they unleashed their forces of terror against their own citizens and totally annihilated those people who were fighting or struggling for their freedom. Now, having spoken so much, I think one must also think of what do we conclude from this. As Mr. Chairman said, what do we do? How to wriggle out of the situation? Since we know the root cause of terrorism is injustice and inequality, therefore, when the individual does not get justice and fair treatment, he revolts against the existing laws and norms of service, norms of that particular pattern, what is taking place, and take law into their own hands. Since the existing world order fails to redress his grievances, therefore he resorts to violence to get their rights. No, therefore, the logical conclusion is to give people fair treatment and justice, and do not mold the law according to your own requirements. Let the law take its normal course. Let the justice be imparted to people. Now, Brahmanism we've discussed at length. But shall we say that Brahmanism is not confined only to India? Brahmanism is an attitude of self-conceited importance and superiority over others. I am very important, I am very rich, I am scientifically very advanced, I can play hell into anybody, therefore I have the right to rule the world. Now, this is what America is doing right now. So this Brahmanism has to be shaken off the heads of those big powers. The sooner they realize, the better. What they've been doing so far is to kill the terrorist and not the terrorism. You kill one terrorist, 10 more are created. Pakistan has been protesting time and again that when you attack in our border belt with the drones, as per US government's official statistics, 86 civilians are killed and only 14 are the wanted criminals. Now, what justification is there to kill 86 innocent civilians, including women and children? And that's also their claim. Actually, the actual figure is far less than 14%. So when such deaths take place, remember, to take revenge is in the blood and genes of every Afghan. They go on taking revenge for ages after ages and centuries after centuries. So when he sees his mother or father or child dead, he says, I will take the revenge. So he in turn picks up soft targets in the settled areas of Pakistan, because Pakistan government is siding with the American government. So therefore he takes revenge by attacking the soft targets like bus stands, congested markets, schools, and so on and so forth. So Pakistan has been saying that for every one so-called terrorist that you kill, we suffered at least 100 additional casualties as a reaction. This point has to be understood by those who matter. Thank you very much for giving me a patient hearing.
Dr. Atwar Singh Sekhon, he's actually from Canada. He firmly believes that the Sikhs will never ever compromise on Khalistan, however long it takes. And his view is that the homeland for the Sikhs of Khalistan will be a buffer state between India and Pakistan always. I think that's your view. But do come and talk to us.
Mr. Chairman, former director of London Institute of South Asia and the present director of LISA, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, Adawards, and Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and greetings to you all. First of all, I will go to the comment by our chairman that next speaker is coming from India. I hate to be called Indian. My date of birth is 1941, when Punjab was annexed to empire. So I am a citizen of Punjab annexed to, which was next to the British Empire, not to British Indian Empire. That is a difference. Punjab was a sovereign state and first sovereign and secular state of South Asia. And that's where I take a pride in that one. And my head is always high when I meet the people like you and my big brother Vidira Shekhar, professor of Sikhism, who has already spoken to you, and my respected brother who made me to stand before you today, and that is the Honorable Usman Khalid. I have great respect for him, great respect for chairman and the present director. I have to be very brief, but before that, I proceed to the subject of our annual meeting of the London Institute of South Asia 2012, the institution that came into being to address the problems of South Asian region in a far greater respect. I would like to draw the attention of the audience on the term of terrorism. If we do not understand, then I think for some of you and some including me. I'm just a student. By profession, I was a scientist, but times made me to go in the history of South Asia, especially the history of the Sikhs. According to the Oxford Guide to the English Language, 1981, the word terrorism has been defined as use of violence and intimidation. Terrorism has been defined as the use of terror, violence, intimidation to achieve, amend, second, fear and subjugation, produced by this, and third, a system of government that uses terror to rule. And this is according to the Canadian Dictionary of English Language. Bali, Lahori Ram Bali, who belonged to Dalit segment, states that the Aryan community of the Buddha's time was steeped in the worst kind of debauchery, social, religious, and spiritual, according to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Since the Aryan times, the Buddhism, an indigenous religion, became the victim of the Brahmins and Islamic invaders. The terror of the Brahminical rules, according to Vincent Smith, as quoted by Bali, had been the worst. The Brahmins and their Brahminical system created the caste system, known as the terror of casteism, which not only divided the humanity into classes, but created the worst terrorist system and gross human rights violations in the history of the mankind. For example, in defiance, the Brahmins poured molten lead into ears, slashed tongue, chopped off body parts, along with humiliation and dehumanization of the non-Brahmins and the people of the lower caste. Because non-Brahmins have been created to serve the Brahmins. In other words, non-Brahmins had been subservient to their masters, the Brahmins. This had been the start of terrorism well before 15th of August 1947. And we the Sikhs are the part of the humanity. There is no caste system in the Sikhs, according to the teachings of our gurus, 10 gurus, and scripture of Sikhism, that is Guru Granth Sahib, and the Sikh way of life. Since 15th of August 47, the Brahmins, using Hindus and Baniyas, killed more than 3.2 to 3.4 million Sikhs. More than 500,000 citizens of the internationally disputed areas of Jammu and Kashmir, here I would call it IDAJK. More than 500,000 Muslims in general, more than 312,000 Christians, 15,000 Tamils, 15,000 Assamese, and its 7 sisters, tens of thousands of Dalit, Adivasis, etc. Sexual crimes by the Brahmins and Hindus. Hindus, armored forces, humiliation and dehumanization are the integral part of the terrorism practiced by the progressive and incredible Indian democracy, which is heard hour on the hour in European newscast or air. A terror in the Sikh holy and historical homeland robbed Punjab of the 15th August 1947. before the day 16th August 1947 came, that Punjab of the Sikhs were robbed. The Sikh nation has been created by using the turban Brahmins, our brothers, you know, and I call them turban Brahmin rats, based on the terminology of Judas rats of World War II. And among them is the Prakash Singh Badal, who is the Chief Minister of Punjab, and his Akali Dal Badal Incorporation, an undeclared war on the Sikhs and their apex religious and political institutions, such as the Darbar Sahib complex, what during the British time terminology came the Golden Temple complex, including the Akal Takht Sahib, which is the supreme seat of the Sikh polity, was waged in the form of a brutal military Operation Blue Star in June 1984. According to the Indian diplomat M.S. Iyer, he was of Foreign Service of India, Indira Gandhi assigned the job of making the Sikhs terrorist in January 1984, 5 months before Operation Blue Star. And this was a ground to prepare the undeclared war on the Sikhs and the Sikh nation Punjab. Thereafter, Punjab became the concentration camp, ladies and gentlemen, concentration camp, right after Operation Blue Star in 1984. Thereafter, in October-November 1984, genocide of Sikhs had been carried out. In the beginning of 21st century, the saffronized political people and the masters of the New Delhi administration of the Indian government carried out the genocide of the Muslims in Gujarat state of the alleged Indian democracy of Brahmin and Hindus, the turban Brahmin rats, in which more than 14,000 Muslims were slaughtered. The Honorable Justice A. Qadri of the Gujarat High Court is on record that Article 14 of the Indian Constitution failed to provide protection of life to the citizens, I mean the Muslim citizens who were slaughtered. As the author views it, Gujarat genocide of Muslims had been preceded by the genocide of Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, Adivasis, the citizens of the internationally disputed areas of Jammu and Kashmir, Bhopal, since 15th August 1947. In my views, the Brahmins, Hindus, and turban rats created institutions are nothing less than the institution of terrorism. Guru Baba Nanak Sahib, the founder of the Sikh faith, and he defined the Brahmins as a butcher of mankind. And he said in his teachings inscribed in Guru Granth Sahib, Mathe Tikka Ter Toti Ka Khai Hat Shri Jagat Kasai. This Brahmin has a lethal weapon in his hand, and that is what is churi, but now it possesses nuclear bombs. For who? To use against. According to Nirja Chaudhary of the Statesman, and I am quoting, this was an Indian newspaper of the 1980s, entitled Indira's India. Baba Ishar Singh is over 80 years old and he is blind. He has nowhere to go. So he lives in Gurdwara Singh Sabha Sangrur and my brother, Professor Gurtej Singh, knows where the Sangrur is, and most of you too, and my older brother V.D. Rajshekhar as well. He has even to be escorted to the bathroom or the toilet, we call, as he is unable to go there. But he was arrested under section 107/151, the Criminal Penal Code of India, because the police concluded he was a threat to peace in area. An 80-year-old man, blind man, he was a threat. In summation, the state-sponsored terrorism in the Brahmins, Hindus, Indian democracy is the order of the day. To grant membership to India in the international team of nations to curb terrorism internationally, it has been the biggest mistake of anti-terrorism team of the nations to offer the membership to India. Fighting terrorism. The Sikhs, Muslim, Christians, and minorities are the targets of the incredible Indian democracy. To swallow these non-Hindus and Brahmins minorities in order to make India a Hindu Rashtra or Hindu nation. Since 9/11, India's terrorism on its citizens is a shame. In fact, India is a police state. According to Congressman Aurora Baker of the United States of America, for the Sikhs and the minorities, India is the Nazi Germany of Adolf Hitler's time. To establish an everlasting peace in the world, my brothers and sisters, especially the South Asian region, curbing terrorism in the incredible India is a prerequisite of any peace process. Thank you very much.
It's now my very great pleasure to invite Lisa's founding father, Brigadier retired Usman Khan, to address you. I have had the pleasure of knowing Usman for quite a few years now, and the thing I like most about him is that he's not just a Pakistani. He gets my highest accolade for any individual. He is a good human being. Come and talk to us, Usman.
Mr. Chairman, last year also we had a seminar on a similar subject, dealt with terrorism. I read a paper and focused attention on what we call the Takfiri cult in Pakistan, and in fact in the world of Islam. The origin of this cult is in Egypt, where the full name is Al-Takfir wal-Hijra, and their belief is that should a state not be run by the proper principles of Islam, then you should migrate, go into the jungles and hills, train yourself, prepare, come back, reconquer your homeland, establish a base, and from that base establish a Darussalam. Now it is very appealing, but it's appealing only to the extent that universal order and unity of the Muslim Ummah has been a great aim of all Muslims throughout history. That's why the word Khilafah still rings in our ears, something which we want to hear again and again. And it's because there is an attachment with it of theory, of practice, of a glorious past. Now what has happened is that the two things have become confused with each other, and when you actually look at the practice, and we saw the practice in Swat Valley, the practice was anybody who sent his daughter to school or watched television or had a radio in his house was somebody who was fit to be killed. Now, a lot of people in Pakistan sympathize with that, because usually the targets when they started was either Shias or Deobandis, and they're a minority, and sometimes even Christians. So if you were none of these, then you could just shrug your shoulders, walk away, as if it was somebody else's business, not mine. And because of, as Mr. Chairman pointed out, it's because of the good people walking away from such brutality and injustice is what sustains that brutality and injustice. I expressed concern last year that unfortunately there are a lot of people in Pakistan who feel like that, who are not prepared to put a stop to it. Now in that 1 year, things have changed. As you know, Sawat operation was launched, it was popular, and with popular will, the rebellion was crushed. Therefore, Al-Takfir wal-Hijra as an institution is unlikely to raise its head again in Pakistan. It will probably linger in some minds and in some hearts, but it's not likely to flourish. If in fact it might be dying down already. But what has happened in that 1 year is that a lot of Pakistanis, Afghans, and Indian Muslims have been recruited by CIA for clandestine operations in northern part of Pakistan and Afghanistan. So what has happened is that the asymmetrical war that we used to talk about has now two sides. Both sides have got a concept and a view. Both sides have got a strategy, and both sides have developed tactics and weapons. And I think it needs to be understood what they are and what we can do about it. America has understood that what Alan Hart just told us about, that when people decide that they're going to be free, nothing can stop them. And when people support them internationally, then nothing indeed can stop them. A lot of people have obtained freedom from oppression and from occupation since the Second World War, and we know that. And it happened because of something that we enshrined in the UN Charter. We said in the UN Charter that we recognize the right of self-determination, we like democracy, the right of representative rule, and we are going to not deviate from these important principles. These principles were not established by the United Nations, but they were established at Westphalia, or they are just generally known as Westphalian Order of 1648. As you know, at that time also, in Europe, Central Europe particularly, people had been fighting for a very long time. There had been a 30-year war within the Holy Roman Empire. There had been an 80-year war between the Dutch and the Spanish. The Peace of Westphalia, in fact, brought peace between these warring nations and established certain rules. And those rules, there were 2 treaties, and there were 4 rules. The peace at Munster between the Dutch Republic and the Kingdom of Spain was ratified, and that brought peace between them. And there was a Treaty of Osnabrück, which brought peace to the Holy Roman Empire. The treaties initiated a political order which survived a lot of trials since then, and it enshrined principles. 1, sovereign nations are equal. Empire is gone and past, they are going to die away. So the preference of sovereign nation state over an imperial state through the Peace of Westphalia. The second was that representative rule was preferable over the rule by kings Habsburgs at that time, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They were the ones who were defeated. The third was to recognize the principle of national self-determination. These principles were incorporated in the Constitution of the Holy Roman Empire. These principles have now been incorporated in the UN Charter. Today we face a threat to these principles, and the threat comes from two quarters. And one is United States of America, as Alan Hart just pointed out. The United States of America no longer recognizes the sovereignty of states, and it freely intervenes in the internal affairs of states, does not recognize their sovereignty, attacks them freely, and in the name of either humanitarian causes or sometimes in the name of oppressive leaders for a regime change. So United States today, which is the most important country in the world, most powerful country in the world, has abandoned loyalty to the principles of Westphalian peace. They have abandoned loyalty to the UN Charter. This is the greatest threat that we face today. Now look at the history of the Muslim world. The Muslim world still feels nostalgia towards the caliphate, which ended in the First World War. First World War, Turkey was defeated. Young Turks movement revolted against their own sultan, and they established in Turkey a secular nation state. The model was followed by two other independent states at that time, which were Afghanistan and Iran. They both also formed secular nation states. In Afghanistan was the first to rebel against secular nation states, and King Amanullah was removed from office. I think he was probably killed also. But King Amanullah lost his throne very soon. The second to end as a secular nation state was Iran. We know about the Shahanshah and the revolution. And quietly and slowly, even Turkey has abandoned the path of secular nation state. But all of them, Turkey particularly, has followed the principles which are established by the Westphalian order. The three principles that were established there. Now, that order collapsed, but it took nearly 50, 60 years to do so. What happened elsewhere was that the Arab world monarchs was imposed on them, and there was a cause celebre in Middle East, Palestine, which was also created at the same time as the First World War. So the creation of monarchies and the creation of Israel took place simultaneously. And there was something stirring in the Muslims of India, and that also stirring took place at the same time, and it was called Khilafat movement. So the people from India who were slaves at that time, the Muslims from India migrated through Afghanistan, Russia, and went to save the caliphate in Turkey. So there was a great resurgence in the Muslims of India. That resurgence got some direction, and that direction was provided by the Muslim League and Qaeda-e-Azam and the movement and the Pakistan movement. So when Pakistan came into being, Pakistan is a multi-ethnic state, as we are all aware. The polity that it embraced was Islam. Polity is, by definition, is the principle of national solidarity of a nation. So the principle of national solidarity of Pakistan was Islam. But we embraced the principles of UN Charter as well as the treaties of Westphalia. The Westphalian principle. Now Pakistan constitutes a synthesis of two huge experiments which have culminated into what we call the modern world order, created in 1648, but it has survived since. It has been honored by everybody. It has survived communism. It has survived Nazism, and it will probably survive anything else because it is something intrinsically which is in line with human nature and with the people wanting to have their own way, have their own rulers. So Pakistan constitutes a country which actually combines two great successful experiments which have been carried out in the world. One is the democracy, and the other is national self-determination, and Pakistan recognizes both. Now when the war started in, not war, first the occupation occurred by the Soviet Union of Afghanistan, Pakistan decided at that time that we are going to help the Afghans become free of occupation. We helped them 2 years on our own, entirely on our own, nobody helped us. And after 2 years, the Americans decided that this is something which needed support by them. And after that, now again, two great things combined. The desire of the Afghan people to be free, and the desire of the superpower of that time to help that freedom movement. Because they combined, the freedom came about. So there are a lot of people who are critical of outsider help and so on and so forth, as if the Muslims were a law unto themselves. We are not part of humanity. We are a very important part of humanity, and we by our own logic, we try and say that we are among the monotheistic faiths. We are the one which is complete, which is protected by God Himself in the shape of Quran, and therefore Muslims, you will see, have a sense of superiority because of that. They don't feel superior because of their ambient conditions today, but they feel superior because of their faith. Now Pakistan helped Afghanistan. Afghanistan became free. Then Soviet Union collapsed. 6 Muslim countries and 18 or 19 different nations emerged out of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now the collapse of the Soviet Union was an operation of the principles of Westphalian Charter. So anything which is in accordance with recognized universal principles lasts. So therefore the breakup of the Soviet Union and the emergence of these states will last. It is something which is a permanent gain. Similarly, those friends of mine from India here today who think that, who think, of course we know it too, that India is a multi-ethnic, multinational state, the Westphalian order will apply there too one day, as long as we become clear as to what we are about. So the solution, in fact, is staring us in the face. What has happened is that after the 2-3 challenges that we faced, we failed to liberate Palestine. Pakistan failed to liberate Kashmir, but we succeeded to liberate Afghanistan. Now, this combination has brought into being what we call global jihad. Now, if this global jihad is hijacked by Khilafah, Muslims are going to be in great trouble. If global jihad, which is liberation, conforms to the Westphalian order and the rules of international law, then it is a force for the positive and is a force that the entire world can celebrate. So that is my message today. That's what the conclusion that I am arriving at is that Muslims, after a long journey of rise and fall, of practicing and experimenting a lot of things, have finally found that global jihad matters. But what has happened is, or what might happen is, that this might be hijacked by the people in the name of, some people in the name of Khilafah, by takfiris, muhajirun, and people, all sorts of names. And then they start killing Shias, or start killing Barelvis and what have you, or Christians, or whatever they are. So my message today is that the order, the Westphalian order survived for such a long period of time, since 1648. And over a period of time, but a lot of challenges have come about and they survived. We as Pakistanis subscribe to it. We must honor it. It doesn't have an origin in Quran. It has origin in history, human history, to the human race to which we all belong. To that human race has reached the conclusion 48, and that conclusion is valid. It must be applied to India. It must be applied to our region. It must be elevated. And America must be made to honor its commitment of the UN Charter. And I think we'll have peace in the world. Thank you, sir.
Just one thing I would challenge you on, my dear Osman. You talk about the success of democracy. I think democracy is one of those words which is so abused and misused, like love. I don't think democracy exists anywhere in the world, and least of all in America in some important respects. For democracy to exist, the citizens of nations have to be informed enough about a whole range of critical issues to call and hold their governments to account. There is no country in the world, my friends, where the citizens of voters are informed enough to do that. So I think, while I agree with almost everything you said, I think our challenge is to find the way, and this echoes VT, to give substance to democracy. We have a scaffold. We've got to give substance to it. And we actually need a decent media for that to happen.
There is one very secret organization in India called Abhinava Bharat. It's all the members of the organizations have been arrested. They are in a jail in a town called Nasik, N-A-S-I-K, in Maharashtra. All Brahmins and very well looked after by the state. For your information, a major part of the Bombay terrorist attack was done by them. Malegaon is before that. They staged the Bombay terrorist attack to kill a IPS police officer, Karkare. And they were responsible for a series of attacks, including one in Punjab. Samjhota Express going to Pakistan, I think. But they were very well looked after by the state, and it's headed by Lieutenant Colonel Purohit, who is serving Lieutenant Colonel in the army, young man. He visited Israel twice. The Jewish state has given them all the money and the weapons. The government of India knows it. They were used only against the Muslims. I don't think it was used against the Sikhs. But this is kept a secret, and the media is not publishing anything about it because they are all their own blood brothers. Thank you.
I just want to make a point about the media. They're all blood brothers, says VT. Do you know, there's a more simpler explanation for why the mainstream media in the whole of the Western world, and frankly the whole of the Arab world and India, will not criticize at all or very much Zionism and what we might call its associates, Brahmanism and so forth and so on.
Yankeeism.
Yes, there are some supporters of these forces in the media, but there's a much more rational explanation. Newspapers, frankly, do not exist to sell news and newspapers. They exist to sell advertising space. And what they are terrified of, not just frightened, they're terrified. If they offend Zionism too much, the advertising plugs will be pulled and they'll go bankrupt. That's the real root, and you're nodding. That's the real root of the problem. Now you can say, well, the BBC isn't funded commercially. No, it isn't. But having worked for the BBC also, I can give you a little insight into that. When there are quite a lot of Zionists who actually are on the side of the BBC, but leaving that aside, whenever the BBC criticises Israel at all or over much, it gets hit with up to 10,000 emails a protest, accusing it of anti-Semitism and this, that and the other. Now they usually only come from two sources. If you're a busy reporter, you know, or anything, you just don't want all this hassle. So it's self-censorship in the case of the BBC, and that is the worst kind of censorship. Okay, now let's see if we can get to one or two general questions. Now, the general question I extract from what we said is this. If you look at the whole of the Western world, all we peoples have one thing in common. At least 70 to 75% of us loathe our politicians. All of them. I think that loathing basically is almost a global thing. We don't believe them, we know most of them are corrupt. So the question is, why don't we do something about it? Why don't we rise up and say, up with this, we're not going to put? Is it because we don't care? Is it because we are simply too busy with our own little lives and problems? Or is it because we do care, but we think, oh, the fight's too big, we can't take them on, we're too impotent? I mean, I'm now asking the question, what is it? Why don't we? See, I think we're in a race in the Western world. I think we're in a race between which comes first. Orwell's 1984, I believe we are well on the road to that now. Or a revolution by peaceful democratic means from the bottom up. I have 7 grandchildren, and currently I don't think they have the chance of a future worth having. So I ask the question not just because I'm interested, but I ask it for the sake of my grandchildren as well. Has anybody got an answer? PT.
I can only speak on behalf of India. English education in India is, when I say English education, reading, writing, speaking, is confined to less than 3% of the population. And the Indian languages, there are about 20-25 of the Indian languages, they are confined to another 20 to 25% of the population. And these people are all upper caste. People have been deliberately kept poor and illiterate. When you are not having enough even to eat, how can you think of a revolution?
Yes.
All right, but put it this way. In India, we have about, correct me on figures, we have about 100 million getting stinking, filthy rich, like these bloody rich Arabs in the Gulf. But we have 800 million poor and getting poorer.
Yes.
Now the difference between today and yesterday, the poor didn't know they were poor. Now they know they are poor, not only in relation to their own rich, but the whole world. Now, is that a tenable situation? 100 million getting richer and 800 million getting poorer?
Yeah, you are right. They know they are poor, they know they are suffering, but they don't know who is sucking their blood. They don't know that. That's the point.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Thank you, it's a good question. A couple of months ago, there was a professor called James Dingley, probably you heard about him, from Belfast University. He did an interesting lecture in House of Lords. And he mentioned that when middle class is threatened, they create countries. And when working class is threatened, they go to agitations. And I kind of agree with his theory that it's your question is, what are the lower classes doing? And what seems to be happening is that the organization which VT was mentioning, that when you're in the middle class, you are resenting the low class because you don't want to be part of it. You can't go to the upper class because
they don't want you.
They don't want you. And that is a situation when you are neither here nor there. Now, the middle classes are the classes who run the country, any state. And when you hear, I was talking about this term rationalization. Now, all the job cuts which you talk worried about your grandchildren, all the cuts in NHS, public sector, etc., are happening in the name of rationalization. Because they have finished all the manufacturing industry, they've gone into consumerism, and consumerism is linked with the Sainsbury local, Asda local, local Tesco. This is something which is sucking all the blood. And one more thing, which is the increasing number of bookies, Paddy Power, Powerbet, William Hills, off licenses. Where are they opening? They're all opening in poor, deprived areas. Who's opening them? Who's allowing the planning permissions to do that?
Yeah, but
and that is people who are sitting in the middle classes in the council offices who are allowing it.
But so there's no more blood to be sucked. If you look at Britain, for example, I mean, I'm one of those who believe that the capitalist system as we presently practice it is terminally doomed. We're only kicking the can down the road. If you look at Britain, the time is coming when governments are not going to be able to afford spending on anything like they do now on the health service, on education. The money's just not going to be there. Now, presumably, at some point, that does take us to the streets. Now, I tell you a chilling story in that context. When I used to cover Northern Ireland quite a lot, Panorama, I used to have monthly dinners with General Sahari Chuzo, who was the second General Officer commanding Northern Ireland. He had been number 2 in NATO. And he told me one evening over dinner why the British Army was so pleased to be engaged with the terrorists in Northern Ireland. Because of all the rehearsal and the practice it gave them for when it happened on the mainland in 10, 15, 20 years. He said, we shall be the only army in the Western world that has the experience to cope with it. They know it's coming, and I'll drop one other name. Shortly after Ted Heath ceased to be Prime Minister, my wife and I had lunch with him, and I said, Mr. Heath, what's your biggest fear for the future? Now, because I'd made a film on global poverty, and he had served on the Brand Commission, I thought he would say something about global poverty, but he didn't. He said, quote, that Britain will become the first police state in the so-called democratic world, unquote. So it isn't only Alan Hart who thinks that things are going very bad in this country. In the 1960s, the world was roughly divided into 2 worlds, one rich, one poor. In the rich world, there were 20%. In the poor world, there were 80%. Now, if the capitalist managers in the rich north had been sensible, they'd have said, hey, we're going to run out of people to buy our goods and services. Our marketplace is limited. We better start investing in the poor of the world to bring them progressively into the marketplace. That way, capitalism would have had a sustainable future, taking notice of the right way to protect the world and all of that. But we didn't do that. We said, screw the rest of the world, and we brought in credit cards and everything else and said to the 20%, just go on spending, spending, spending.
It's like putting someone on drugs.
Yeah. And that's why, in my view, Britain is economically doomed. It's been nothing but a consumer boom. And there's no growth. There's no growth.
I think, and I'd like to thank particularly the speakers who have come from different parts of the globe and come to interact with us, come to through the forum of teaser. We are going to propagate what we have talked, and I loved what Alan just said. Listen, damn it, we know what is happening. We know exactly what it is. To keep on repeating it here, even the seminars, is not good enough. What are we doing about it? Any protests? Do we? And if there are small little 40, 50 people standing in front of our High Commission or embassy, that's immaterial. What about change of the governments to the democratic method? Well, Alan has talked about it. It's not going to bring in a change at all in any part of the world. And the third and the final thing is, speak out, rise, it matters. Your voice matters, and that's what is the message of teaser. I'll just leave you with the thought, we have exceeded the time, and we can have our conversation in the next room over there and have a cup of tea and a bit of snacks.
Yeah, sure.
Can I just add 2 sentences to that about people becoming mobilised? You will remember that just before the war in Iraq, 1.5 to 2 million people demonstrated, right, against the war. Now they were from all backgrounds, all classes. People say to me, Alan, you're naive in thinking that people power can change things. And I say, no, I'm not. Because if you read the memoirs of the cabinet ministers of the time, they were terrified. They were wobbling because there were 1.5 to 2 million. The answer, my friends, is it would have been different if there had been 3 or 4 million. That would have changed it. It's actually about people power.